I'm running a Minute of Black. Can you talk about my public access show? About what this is?
About what this is?
Yeah. In 20 seconds.
Okay.
Hi, this is Paula Gloria, and this show is called Farther Down the Rabbit Hole. And today we're at an event, Picture the Homeless. And I'm going to ask someone what's up. Can you tell me what this event is about?
Yes, good. Hello. This is an event is to raise awareness within what's going on with within the homeless community and towards homeless people. Within Picture the Homeless, which is an organization created by the homeless for the homeless. I just wanted to help the homeless know their rights as well as people, which they have a very hard time relating. That's just due to the everyday treatment that they get from society.
Yeah, I saw that it says talk with us, not about us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so. We're just trying to just because people don't have homes doesn't mean that they're not human. They're just,
of course not.
You know, they just don't have homes. Originally, we all started without homes. We just walked this earth. So, you know,
right.
We're just out here trying to help those that have gotten in a situation where they become less than fortunate.
And what are you putting the pictures up?
Oh, today is May 19th, Malcolm X's birthday. So, although within Picture the Homeless still has its agenda within my part as a Malcolmist, I gotta let that great man, that great face, be known and shown. Dead, but never forgotten, always missed in love, Mr. Malcolm X Al-Haj Malik Al-Shabazz.
What did he say about homelessness?
Right, no, Malcolm was well aware that it's all a struggle, whether from class, race, imperialism, anything of that nature. Still, people need to get educated and unite and come together, because this is a problem that's a lot bigger than us, and we really have no idea about what's coming towards us, and our only salvation will really be each other.
And this button here?
Yes, ma'am. Oh, Malcolm X on his Hajj towards Mecca.
Oh. Have you been to Mecca?
Probably no, ma'am. Not yet.
Ah, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Tape is in the light.
These roses are very fragrant.
There's literature and stuff over here. We're set up to have, a lot of good, strong culture and speakers and so forth. We got a press conference at 2:30.
You want to film me?
Yeah.
I got you.
We're public access M&N
Yes.
producers. Here's my fellow producer, Sandra Taylor, and her husband, Robert.
Thank you and welcome to the movement. The movement is a progressive and cutting-edge cable access show where we feature emerging artists from all genres of music and special topics. Today, we are in the Bronx at Brook Park, and what we're doing is we're covering a major event. This event is sponsored by Picture the Homeless. And from what we understand about this event, and it sounds very interesting, they are protesting the fact that buildings are being foreclosed here in the Bronx and they're being warehoused. Unused properties that have been closed down, and homeless advocacy organizations are very upset about that. So they're protesting that today, and they're going to have a march. We also understand that they're going to attempt to take over one of the buildings and begin gutting the buildings, taking the debris to Bank of America, and I believe Chase Manhattan Bank as well. So we're going to go in, we're going to check out this event, and when we come back, we'll have more information for you. All right, I'm old school, and we'll be right back.
They had some hemp plants. That would be one of the best healthcare insurance programs. Let nature heal. Isn't it beautiful here?
She has a beautiful young child right here, beautiful girl, and we're going to interview her, sit down and talk to her.
Is that her?
That's her. No, she's right here.
We'll email them to find out when they're going to see you.
Killed his buzz.
Attracted to events like this is I spent literally 10 years on the street myself. I was, for the last 3 of the 10 years, I was homeless in a park. And I found out at that point how bad the system is. You know, you always hear stories, and they really don't. I mean, I know at times I've heard stories of people who were homeless and they suffered out on the streets, and I can never understand why they would stay on the streets as long as they did until I became homeless myself. The shelters were worse than jail. The programs and
oh,
absolutely, men too. Men too. I remember particularly being at Fort Washington Men's Shelter, and it was notorious for a few things. The gay population was overwhelming there. So they were raping men. The beds were set up on what's called the drill floor, which is almost the size, it's just like prison, almost the size of a football field. And they would have their beds tied together, have sex right there out in the open. And the security staff was selling drugs in there. They were throwing people out windows who didn't pay them. So I wound up back on the streets. Needless to say, that was not an environment. Exactly, it was safer out on the streets fighting rats and cops than it was being inside the shelter system. But what was even more difficult was trying to get off the streets through different organizations. There was so much red tape, so many restrictions, so many unbelievable requirements in order to get shelter or some type of temporary housing that it just became ridiculous to try. So I stayed out on the streets for 10 years. So that's why I'm here at this event. Right now I'm getting ready to go cover a young lady who has a very interesting story. So thanks for having me on this show. God bless you.
Broken glass everywhere. People pissing on the stage, you know they just don't care. I can't take the smell, can't take the noise. Got no money to move out, I guess I got no choice. Rats in the front room, rollers in the back, junkies in the alley with the baseball bat. I tried to get away, but I couldn't get far, cause a man with a touch of repossessed my car. Don't push me, cause I'm close to the edge. I'm trying not to lose my head. Crazy lady living in the bag, eating out of garbage, used to be a fag hag. So she can tell us how to take the girls back home to the city and got so I'm close to the peaks in the hole like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under.
My brother's doing all my children in the daytime, now he's fighting. The bill collectors, they ring my phone and scare my wife when I'm not home. Got a bum education, double-digit inflation, can't take the train to the job. There's a strike at the station, I swear I might hijack a plane. Don't push me, call, I'm close to the edge. Wonder how I keep from going under. It's like a
they placed me for 10 days, and then after the 10 days, they took me out. So I've been doing overnight since February 2nd, when I was pregnant.
Now explain to us what an overnight is. And if you can speak up for the camera, I know I do it so loud in the background.
Here we go. to a hotel for one night. But we can do it in the morning.
Homes, not shelters. Homes, not shelters.
Homes, not shelters.
And they loved the master more than the master loved himself. They would give their life to save the master's house, quicker than the master would. If the master said, "We got a good house here," the house neighbor would say, "Yeah, we got a good house here." Whenever the master said "we," he said "we." That's how you can tell a house Negro. If the master's house caught on fire, the house Negro would fight harder to put the blaze out than the master would. If the master got sick, the house Negro would say, "What's the matter, boss? We sick?" We sick! He identified himself with his master more than his master identified with himself. And if you came to the house Negro and said, "Let's run away, let's escape, let's separate," the house Negro would look at you and say, "Man, you crazy, what do you mean separate? Where is there a better house than this? Where can I wear better clothes than this? Where can I eat better food than this?" That was that house Negro. In those days, he was called a house nigger. And that's what we call them today, because we've still got some house niggers running around here. I'm a new African anarchist, I can say that. This modern house Negro loves his master. He wants to live near him. He'll pay 3 times as much as the house is worth just to live near his master. And then brag about, "I'm the only Negro out here. I'm the only one on my job. I'm the only one in this school." You're nothing but a house Negro. And if someone comes to you right now and says, "Let's separate," you say the same thing that the house Negro said on the plantation. "What do you mean separate? From America? This good white man? Where are you going to get a better job than you got here? I mean, this is what you say. I ain't left nothing in Africa, that's what you say? Why, you left your mind in Africa." On that same plantation, there was the field Negro. The field Negroes, those were the masses. There were always more Negroes in the field than there were Negroes in the house. The Negro in the field caught hell. He ate leftovers. In the house, they ate high up on the hog. The Negro in the field didn't get anything that was left of the insides of the hog. They called it chitlins nowadays. In those days, they called them what they were. Guts. That's what you were. Gut eaters. And some of you are still gut eaters. The field Negro was beaten from morning to night. He lived in a shack, in a hut. He wore old, cast-off clothes. He hated his master. I said he hated his master. He was intelligent. That house Negro loved his master, but that field Negro, remember, they were in the majority, and they hated the master. When the house caught on fire, he didn't try to put it out. That field Negro prayed for a wind, for a breeze. When the master got sick, the field Negro prayed that he die. If someone came to the field Negro and said, "Let's separate, let's run," he didn't say, "Where are we going?" He'd say, "Any place is better than here." You got field Negroes in America today. I'm a field Negro. The masses are field Negroes. When they see this man's house on fire, you don't hear these little Negroes talking about our government is in trouble. They say the government is in trouble. Imagine you go, our government. I even heard one say, our astronauts. They won't even let him near the plant. And our astronauts.
A lot of people today, they don't think about it. They say, "Oh, they're putting a man on the moon." Or, "Oh, they're setting up another space shuttle." But you see, they don't realize that in the early days of the space program, NASA was whites only. This was, when was it? 1957, 58. It was a different time, you understand. See, in 1957, if you were black, and if you were an astronaut, you were out of work.
They had names like Loopy Louie Hayes, Suitcase Jefferson, and Rocket Randall. What they lacked in technical know-how, they more than made up for in courage and zeal. The courageous heroes of the old Negro space program.
Oh, it started like any old thing, I suppose. It started over a girl. I was over at this little juke joint where we used to hang out at. And I was making time with this cute little stuck-up thing named Alita Monroe, who I later on married. She told me she couldn't be with a man who didn't have no job. So I called up my best friend, Louis Hayes. I said, Louis, where can a Negro get a job? It was a different time, you understand. 1957-58. So Louis said he heard that they were forming a new government agency. So the both of us went down to NASA. But to our surprise, they weren't hiring any Negroes at NASA. It was a different time, you understand.
It was a different time. 1957 or 58. America's love affair with racism was in full swing. NASA was no exception.
What we see recurring or reoccurring, if I may, in this story or tale, if you will, is the insistence or the assertion on the part of NASA that it never happened, which I think is a very roundabout way of denying or negating something, if that is indeed your intention or your intent.
We was young and we didn't know nothing, but we wasn't going to let nobody tell us we couldn't do it. So we put together our own gig, got ourselves some uniforms, and I told Alita Monroe that I was working for NASA, the Negro American Space Society of Astronauts. Got laid that very night.
The uniforms were stitched by hand. The rockets, cobbled together from NASA's discards. Word spread quickly. By the summer of 1960, NASA had over 240 blackstronauts. White NASA was beginning to take notice.
Kennedy was aware of the Negro space program and very much against it, his stance on civil rights notwithstanding. One can only imagine, as terrified as the administration was of losing the space race to the Russians, they were 10 times more terrified of losing it to the Negroes.
As Washington fumed, Harlem celebrated. The ragtag group of blackstronauts were becoming minor celebrities, traveling from town to town, staging launches to raise money, endorsing local businesses, their exploits glorified in song.
Oh, there goes Loopy Louie.
Where's he going, friend?
If I know Loopy Louie, he's shooting up again.
Is that right?
He's shooting up again.
Don't tell me.
He's shooting up again.
Oh, shit.
For a time, it seemed the Negro space program could do no wrong. But there were casualties. With their cloth spacesuits and their makeshift rockets, blackstronauts faced far greater hardships than their white counterparts. A week into his first orbital mission, Sullivan Carew wrote home to his wife in Smithfield.
Dear Sarah, the indications are very strong that I shall attempt re-entry tomorrow. And lest I shall not be able to write you again, I feel impelled to write a few lines, that they may fall under your eye when I am no more. It sure is fucking cold up here. Yes, sir. I about froze my motherfucking nuts off. God damn. Space is one cold motherfucker. Sarah, my love for you is deathless. It seems to bind me to you with mighty cables that only omnipotence can break. But shit, woman, it is cold as fuck up here.
Sullivan Carew died 2 days later upon re-entry. Even so, casualties did not slow down black NASA as they did white NASA.
Here we have a tale of two very different cultures, or cultural settings, if I may. For example, when the Apollo 1 astronauts blew up on the launch pad, there was an investigation and a congressional hearing and so on and so forth. By contrast, when the Negro astronaut Peter Stinky Pete Carver caught fire in a church parking lot in Elgin, Illinois, they just casually extinguished him and he was ready for another launch the next morning.
Before long, Washington had had enough, but the Negro space program was not easily shut down.
At this point, or juncture, NASA goes ahead and poaches some of the lighter-skinned black astronauts, and to a certain extent this worked quite well. Gordon Cooper, Buzz Aldrin could pass for white. And of course the final blow, the coup de grace, if I may, was the so-called Black Blackout, in which Washington surreptitiously prevents the media from discussing the accomplishments of the black astronauts, and instead encourages them to spread rumors of riots and civil unrest. In fact, much of the news we read in those days was all part of a well-orchestrated diversion or misdirection, if you will. The lesson here, I think, is that people believe what they want to believe.
The final blow to the Negro space program came ironically at its finest hour, September 31st, 1966, a full 3 years before Neil Armstrong. Jefferson and Hayes land their modified Cadillac Coupe de Ville just east of the Sea of Tranquility. But because of the Black Blackout, the accomplishment is completely buried by the mainstream media.
Well, we expected to be heroes, but when we got back, we were just Negroes.
Dejected and discouraged, NASA officially disbanded. But its heroes live on, for the few who care to learn their story.
Truth shall make us free. Truth shall make us free. Truth shall make us free someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe truth shall make us free someday. We shall overcome. We shall.
And especially in a capitalist society where we think like money.
So here I am, Paula Gloria, and I've just been at the event about the homeless, and they're saying that the problem is economic, but my problem is they're not really putting a solution on the table, and I think that's important. I think for those of you who've been following the show, you can kind of get the gist of why I was leading the discussions in the way that I did. And it seems as though a lot of people realize that cannabis is not a problem. It's not as dangerous to justify giving people felonies, ruining young men and women's lives, usually though more Hispanic and black men than other races and sexes that are represented. but they don't usually realize how powerful the oil is when it's in high concentrations, just how healing it could be. And this puts to rest the anxiety that we have about health care, and also gets us to see that we need to reorganize capital distribution. And they're not talking about this. They're later on going to be marching to the bank as if the foreclosures is the problem of the bank. It seems as though the evictions happen because whoever owns the buildings, and I really doubt who really owns the buildings, not the co-ops, not the boards that are kind of the fronts, but whoever really owns those buildings, I really don't think they're in a problem of having foreclosures going along. So you have to look deeper. Again, Henry George was known by intellectuals. Every intellectual 100 years ago understood what's in progress in poverty. So I highly encourage the institutions that do know about Henry George to see if the most valuable thing possible can be shared, and that is knowledge, so that when we understand what's happening, we can ask the right questions. And once we're asking the right questions, we can get the answers and change things. So thank you. This is Paula Gloria, and this has been an excursion in the Bronx, farther down the rabbit hole. And happy Malcolm X's birthday.
Louis Kelso. Mr. Kelso is, in the minds of many, the economist. He's defining a new economics that has incredible implications in terms of the American, Western, and world economies. And Louis Kelso, once again, welcome very, very much to Conversations indeed.
Pleasure to be here, Harold.
We've entitled the program The Economics of Reality, and you had entitled your book, Two-Factor Theory, The Economics of Reality.
What it does, Harold, is to highlight the fact that in a very real and practical sense, economics as a valid discipline hasn't begun yet. Well, believe it or not, it is the concept of economists, as I say, past and present, that there's only one way to legitimately earn income. We simply say there are two. There is no resemblance between one-factor economics and the economics of reality, which I will call two-factor economics. The conventional wisdom, that scoffing term for people who pretend to be wise and are wrong, holds that the only legitimate way for individuals to acquire income is through the employment of their labor power, the powers of their bodies and mind. It's our position that not only can one earn income that way, it's our position that one can and does earn income through his privately owned capital. Land, structures, machines, certain intangibles that are given by law or custom. Since most of the assets in the American economy are owned by corporations, the form that that ownership of capital takes is the ownership of stock. The common law defines property in producer goods as a bundle of rights, including the right to possess, to use, to lease, to subdivide, even to destroy if you want to. Today, the typical owner, the stockholder, on the average, receives about 1/12 of the income that the assets that he beneficially owns produces. That when we speak of the income earning power of capital, we're talking about something that is 12 times greater than it appears. 12 times as powerful. To say it another way, the income that a $500,000 capital estate would earn for you under that attenuated property arrangement you could receive from a mere $47,000 investment if you got what it really produced.
Right.
Ownership of the second factor of production. Because what I've done is to say the ownership of capital by an individual is a way of earning income. If he got the wages of his capital fully, would be a full-fledged capital worker. We're talking about ways in which people, human beings, citizens, as defined in the United States Constitution, ways in which citizens engage or can engage in production.
Yes.
We were an economic democracy in 1776 when we took the first steps into political democracy. Economic power, on the other hand, is nothing more nor less than the power to produce goods and services. That is economic power. So that in 1776, everyone had economic power because labor was the main source and everyone was born with it. Economic power was democratically diffused throughout the society. But if the input of capital workers were measured in comparison to the input of labor workers, we would find that between 1776 and 1983, for example, that the two forms of input, labor workers versus capital workers, have roughly changed places.
Switched, yeah.
Capital workers provide at least 90% of the input and 10% from labor. Now look at the mess we've gotten into.
That's right.
Look at the mess we've gotten into. If this is accurate, and so help me, Hannah, it's accurate, we have the great bulk of the people, 95% of them, providing a mere 10% of the productive input. And you have a mere 5% of the people who own all the productive capital providing 90% of the productive input. In 1930, and particularly beginning in 1932, we embarked on a program which was later called the War on Poverty, but this is what Roosevelt was really talking about. A war on poverty, which meant a war on the effects of poverty, not on poverty, war on the effects of poverty. In 1946, we officially adopted the one-factor economic policy. Congress got together and said, we want to leave no doubt about this subject. There is only one way to earn income. Employment Act of 1946. Now, pursuant to the War on Poverty and to the Employment Act of 1946, and using the tools of coercive trickle-down. Those are primarily implemented by labor under the policy of the National Labor Relations Act and all the other labor apparatus, under which labor simply makes an assault on the market value of labor power. They demand more and more pay for the same work.
Or less.
Or what's worse, they demand more and more pay for less work. So we've rigged the price of labor. We have used the coercive power of taxation to rip income away from people who earn it. We're trying to hide the fact that when the few produce for the many become parasites. As the most momentous implications under the American Constitution that you can imagine. You can't talk about the right of citizens to earn income in the way in which goods and services are actually produced, or through the tools that they're actually produced today, if you don't recognize that capital workers earn income at all. The fact of the matter is they're operating on a set of facts that is unreal. It has no relation to the world. The conventional wisdom holds that a capital instrument acts essentially like a catalytic agent.
Yes, right.
A catalytic agent, or some kind of a magic device. You put the capital down in the vicinity of the workers, and somehow or other, invisible signals go back and forth between those things, and it raises the productivity of the workers who work in the vicinity of it but don't own it.
Right.
Now, of course, all this is simply fraud done with statistics. What they do is measure the output caused by two input factors and attribute it to the wrong one. And why do they do that? Because they want an excuse and a justification to constantly pay labor more and more for less and less, instead of enabling people to become literally and actually productive in the way in which goods and services is produced. Nobody likes to be a host and earn income, have it taken away from him, to support strangers. I mean, to someone you love, that's another matter, but that's not what the question is. And no red-blooded American wants to be a parasite in any sense of the word. And if he knew his constitutional rights, he would like it even less, because the Constitution tells him, you've got a right to be productive. The right to life with liberty, which is proclaimed by the prologue to the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and by the Constitution itself. The right to life with liberty is meaningless if it doesn't mean you are entitled to the power to earn. Not only are there two ways to earn income, but that the whole thrust of science is to make the capital worker endlessly and progressively more productive, because capital takes the place of labor. Or if it doesn't take the place of it, it at least produces more. The system is totally out of control in that by endlessly building ownership into those who can't use it. We sterilize it on the one hand, and we deprive the system of the tools that it has to have to live. Let's take the case of housing. There was no moment in the history of the world prior to this one when we had the massive capability of building houses of the highest quality, the greatest beauty, the greatest durability, and the lowest cost to right now. And yet,
look at the
great bulk of people who once could have had houses can't have them anymore.
Why?
For the very simple reason that coerced trickle-down economics packs the wage base with welfare and inflates the prices, and relying on labor input, even though it's jiggered, in other words, even though it's enormously exaggerated, it still isn't enough to take what is produced primarily by capital off the market. Those who have only their labor power and its precarious value held up by this coercive rigging, and who desperately need capital ownership to enable them to be capital workers as well as labor workers, can't do it. So on the one hand, we've pushed the price of housing through the ceiling. On the other hand, we put the income in people who don't already have too many houses. Why did they want more and more pay for the same work or less work? Perfectly simple. The system doesn't give them access to capital ownership. In a world in which technology is shifting the burden of production off labor workers onto capital workers, every man needs to have access to capital ownership so that he can buy capital and pay for it out of what the capital produces. I believe nature intended us to shift the burden of production off labor workers onto capital workers. The more difficult it becomes to earn a living, the more people focus on it.
Yes, right.
And that's natural. If the U.S. economy continues to encourage and promote technological advance, which it must, and continues to distribute the resulting income, see which under Say's law goes to those who earn it, those who produce, we would ravage our currency with inflation. And we would turn over our markets to foreigners. Not because the foreigners are necessarily smarter than we are, but because they are, in general, about 10 or 15 years behind us on the road going in the wrong direction. What needs to be adjusted is the opportunity to produce, not the redistribution of income after it's produced. By the way, Aesop, I think, Aesop's fables, Aesop has that law worked out better than I think anyone else. Aesop said it all when he said, you can give meat to a tiger, but you can't take it away from him. Now that's why redistribution doesn't work in the American economy. Why finance tends to make the rich ever richer and to keep the poor, and I define anyone without a viable capital estate as poor. We found out, but everyone knows this once you examine it, it just hadn't been examined, that credit to buy capital, the thing Kuznets was talking about, as the essence of finance. Credit to buy capital is made available to only to people who already own capital.
Who don't need it.
Well, relatively speaking, who don't need it. And it is clinically denied with a snarl and a glance down the bridge of some banker's nose to those who need it. You can't imagine a more perverse arrangement. Capital formation takes place on the logic of self-financing. That is to say, people buy capital instruments with the expectation that they will pay for themselves.
They'd better. It'd be a bad business investment if they didn't.
Well, from the very beginning, man's tool making would have lowered his standard of living. And frankly, as you know, he was not able to afford it. He was living like an animal to begin with.
Right out of the...
Self-financement, or auto-financement, as the Germans call it, is the logic of capital acquisition. You buy capital if you think it will pay for itself in a reasonable period of time in operation, and the rule of thumb in general in business, except in the throes of a severe depression, which we're in and which we will never escape from until we change the economic policy, was 3 to 5 years. It's probably longer than that, more like 5 to 7 or 8 years today. Now, there is nevertheless a risk that it might not pay for itself, called the feasibility risk. In the whole of business, the handling of risk is done by commercial insurance. And this is the normal way. Ask any insurance man, he'll tell you we'd still be in the Stone Age if it weren't for commercial insurance. Because you couldn't build anything very valuable. And take the risk that one wipeout and you're finished forever.
You spread that out.
Spread over a wide base. But the most important business risk of all, because it determines whether labor workers can become capital workers in an industrialized society. In other words, it depends upon whether the constitutional rights of man to his life with liberty are going to be satisfied or not. That risk, that vital, horribly important risk, we have only used self-insurance. In other words, you start a new business, costs $1 million, a banker likes it, he likes the studies and all, he says, I'll finance it. He's not telling you he'll loan you $1 million. He's telling you he'll loan you 2/3 of a million, or maybe 3/4. The rest is self-insurance. Self-insurance is a crude, primitive, obsolete way of insuring the business risk of feasibility.
And they might with that backed up with collateralization, which even it'll just...
Well, that is a form of self-insurance, collateralization, mortgages and what have you. Now, what's needed, obviously, is a reasonably modern way of risk management in finance. The risk needs to be commercially insured or broadly insured so that it doesn't constantly build capital ownership into the already rich where it is sterilized and is no use to the consumer economy, and denies it to the poor, who must firstly suffer. God knows the horror that this kind of stupid finance has inflicted on the world. It is so immeasurable that that it's almost useless to talk about.
Particularly frustrating, you can see alternatives that
yes, of
can
course.
be put in place as you worked out. Yeah.
Now, the ESOP, the Employee Stock Ownership Plan, was the first tool that I invented. I actually invented it before the publication of the Capitalist Manifesto, simply because I'm revolted by the thought of putting forward an idea that can't be implemented. I think as a form of chicanery.
Oh, okay.
The ESOP is a device, and there are hundreds and hundreds of them. There are actually thousands of things called ESOPs, but most of them are counterfeits. But there are a good many real ESOP, real financing devices that enable them, that give employees access to credit so that they can buy the employer's stock, pay for it out of the assets that underlie that stock, and after it's paid for, earn it, collect the wages of it, accumulate it in a tax haven until they retire, and where used efficiently and intensively, when they retire from being labor workers, they continue to be capital workers, and they can go on to their dying day totally self-sufficient. I'm speaking of the ideal case now, because we've got to use it more intensively than we do.
Yes, right.
But the object of the game is really lifetime employment. That's what the thing is all about.
Right.
From the time that you leave your family, get your education, you should begin to be, and thereafter forever be until your dying day, self-sufficient, needing no redistribution, no food stamps, no welfare, no charity, no social security, no pensions, no profit sharing, none of that stuff, which is largely designed to promote the stock market. You know, they churn around and gamble in second-hand securities that have very little value to the individual because their yield is 5 or 6%, always below the rate of inflation, except when you're trying to control inflation with a severe depression. How long
as they increasingly seem to do.
Yeah, how long the American people are going to stand still for that, I think is one of the more interesting speculations.
So we could begin to build an economic democracy to go along with the avowed and in real terms political democracy that we have. We need to have them working in tandem in order to have the country move into a a really appropriate new kind of future that we can see.
About a year ago, I gave some testimony before Senator Mark Hatfield's Senate Appropriations Committee. The title of it was The Right to be Productive.
Yes.
And what that does is marshal the constitutional law case for access to capital ownership. And of course, at the moment, the ESOP is the best way to do it. There are 7 other techniques built on the same logic. Some of them have been partially legislatively implemented. Most haven't. But what's needed, of course, is simply for Congress to say, let's abandon the outmoded and false economic policy that there's only one way to earn an income. Now, I testified very extensively before the Joint Economic Committee back in 1975 when Hubert Humphrey was chairman.
Yes.
And at the conclusion of that testimony, and in the annual report of the Joint Economic Committee, which comes out with the President's Economic Report in January of each year. In the Joint Economic Committee report in January of 1976, the committee recommended to the Congress that they change the economic policy to a 2-factor policy.
Marvelous. I mean,
it would be marvelous, except Congress never paid any attention.
But it has been taken on and seen by people who can see the vision and the logic and the appropriateness of that, that it might be that we could consider collectively as a society a major policy direction or a major policy shift that would allow us to meet some of the major economic problems individually, in an industrial corporate sense, and collectively, and that the kernel of that would be the economics two-factor theory or the economics of reality that you've been putting forward.
The reason economics doesn't work is that it starts from the wrong facts. From there on, it is terribly easy to cure it. About a month ago, some of the world's most highly respected economists met on David Rockefeller's estate up in New York, Pocantico. And they shook their heads and they said, none of the economic theories around the world are working. None. We must set out to find out why. And the Nobel Foundation and the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, or one of the Rockefeller Foundations, indicated that they would back it. And now these fine gentlemen are going to set off on a great economic boondoggle, and whatever the appropriated funds are, they won't find the answer before they've used those. But they're looking for that other little fact.
Well, isn't it good that they're doing that? That there's initiative being taken toward the idea of trying to understand in a broad...
I think it's kind of pitiful that you have to do it. I did it 20 years ago.
Right,
what the hell are they talking about?
Why don't they just call you in and put you...
or why doesn't somebody step up and say, here, gentlemen, is the answer.
Right.
Give me half the $3 million, you take the rest, and we'll save all that boring reading and stuff.
Yeah, right. Well, it is encouraging that there, I mean, it is encouraging the fact that if we look at that, as we look through the conundrums that are confronting us all, as we look at these, that there are solutions, given a certain analysis, given a certain perspective.
It's more than that. These solutions are working.
They're working now.
We're buying some of the very large corporations in the U.S. economy for their employees.
Yeah, it's beginning to happen right now without a big policy statement on the part of Congress. There could be a change of the Full Employment or the Employment Act of 1946. You at one time had thought a Production Act, Full Production Act of
yes. Well, you can call it anything you want.
Yeah.
What it needs is a recognition that we should deliberately begin to broaden the capital ownership base. We should do it consistently with the laws of property, with the constitutional safeguards, but not just the constitutional safeguards of property, but also the constitutional safeguards of the rights of man. We talk about human rights. The right to be productive is the #1 human right. If there's one more important than that, is simply the right not to be killed.
Yeah, right.
On the spot.
Yeah, that's right. And that we could have that kind of a direction toward which we're going is one, and despite the fact that these, let's say in a certain sense, legislative initiatives to change the basic policy structure, to have a generally accepted notion that there could be a dispersal of income, access to credit in order to purchase capital instruments that will pay for themselves, applying the business logic finance to the general citizenry as a method of income distribution, which could also provide for greater capital formation.
I've worked out the details.
You've got the details
and
worked out.
It's terribly simple.
Right. Yeah.
Simply use the Federal Reserve Bank to monetize each transaction determined by the same expertise that determines it today. Firstly, management, secondly, banks. That it's feasible, but with no risk in the Federal Reserve Bank at all. All they do is monetize the transaction. As our last diagram there indicates, the first layer of risk would be taken by the commercial insurers, but to make certain that they feel safe and comfortable, and that they will be backed up, there needs to be one new institution, the Capital Diffusion Reinsurance Corporation, a government corporation that insurance companies could lay off part or all the risk if they want to. And of course, when you lay off risk, you lay off premiums, so you don't do that unless you think you can't make money at it. I guess the most momentous question you can ask about that risk is why would the federal government do a thing like that? I mean, why would it step up and say, well, these enterprises that have been determined to be feasible, if they aren't feasible, why should Uncle insure them? The answer is Uncle insures them anyway. In the last half century has always insured them. Not in that form. If a business fails and people are unemployed and hungry, government picks them up. And government is expected to pick them up. There's no doubt about that.
Why don't we...
The difference is that today government does it without any assurance that the risks to individuals are locked into, rigidly and contractually locked into an expansion of production. As this diagram shows, with each financing, it's determined to be feasible and it's determined to be self-liquidating.
Right, right.
Except for a little risk of feasibility. Insurers have calculated that risk. If it's very big, it will be said to be not feasible and it won't be financed. Well, hell, that goes on every day anyway.
And this would be, in a certain sense, I'm terribly sorry, we're running short on time here, but this would be, in a certain sense, a final assurance to the overall system and the forward movement of the production of the economy as we begin to move ahead, underpinning these approaches and institutional structurings that you've talked of. Is entirely keeping that a Congress or a governmental legislative organization might well do that.
It's simply providing the commercial insurance of something that has been self-insured, and that's its evil.
Yeah, right. Well,
right. What it does for the third world, you can see, is to eliminate the necessity for savings financing. Okay. They don't have to look abroad for savings.
Okay, that's right. Now
that's perhaps the most critical thing at the moment.
Well, that's going to have to wait for another program. I'm terribly sorry, we're running right out of time. But may I just really say thank you again, Louis. It's been a great pleasure being with you. It's been a pleasure for you in the cable audience to have had the perceptions of Louis Kelso, author of An Economic System of incredible import to the Western world economy. Thanks again very, very much for participating. We'll invite you to tune in again next week. I'm sorry, we're running right out of time. That's it for this week. And once again, Louis, thank you very, very much indeed for everything.
Let's take the case of housing. There was no moment in the history of the world prior to this one when we had the massive capability of building houses of the highest quality, the greatest beauty, the greatest durability, and the lowest cost. And yet, great bulk of people who once could have had houses can't have them anymore.